Welcome to True Crime Case Files. In today's episode, we explore a heartbreaking case of betrayal and tragedy. A teen girl, sold by her own father to a 65-year-old husband, meets a devastating end in a brutal murder that left many questioning how this could happen. Join us as we unravel the painful details of this chilling story and examine the dark forces that led to her untimely death. Ellie Mae was only 19 when she died, a young woman with big dreams despite a hard life. Growing up in Jessup, Georgia, Ellie was known for her gentle spirit and love of singing. A self-taught musician, she would spend hours each day practicing gospel hymns, and she often dreamed of auditioning for American Idol. She wanted more than her small-town life could offer, dreaming of moving to Atlanta, a place she'd never been, to start a new life as a contemporary Christian singer. Ellie's friends described her as hopeful, even though she felt trapped in her circumstances. 2 months before her death, Ellie's life took a dark turn when her father, Marley Buell, sold her to Eliezer Marshall DeWitt, a 65-year-old widower and retired pastor. Marley, a former lawyer who had lost his license and fallen into debt, made a deal with Marshall. For $5,000, less than the cost of a used car, Ellie would become Marshall's wife. Marley was known around town as a gambler with a drinking problem, and he saw Ellie as a way to settle his bills, a common scenario in the Deep South. When Marley made the deal, he didn't consider Ellie's feelings or dreams. For Ellie, the arrangement felt like a betrayal. She had always hoped her father would protect her, not sell her. Marshall was well known in Jessup for his conservative sermons, and some townspeople saw him as a respectable, if rigid, figure. But at home, his controlling nature made Ellie's life miserable. She was never allowed to leave Jessup, much less pursue her music dreams. Marshall saw her aspirations as sinful and told her she was made to be his wife, nothing more. He often used scripture to justify his dominance, telling Ellie it was God's will that she serve him in silence, including sexually. Friends said that Ellie seemed sad and withdrawn after marrying Marshall. She often looked worn out and distant, and people could tell she was unhappy. In the days before her death, Ellie was restless. She had started talking more openly about wanting to leave Marshall and escape her life in Jessup. She began to spend time with friends at Bev's liquor store, owned by her friend Bev Turner's family. Ellie found comfort talking with Bev, who listened to her worries and frustrations. Ellie even mentioned running away to Atlanta to audition for American Idol, a glimmer of hope she clung to, even though the chance of escaping seemed slim. Despite her hopes, Ellie faced constant reminders of her situation. Living with Marshall was a daily struggle, and with her father's betrayal still fresh, Ellie felt isolated and alone. She was a young woman trapped by choices others had made for her, but she never stopped dreaming of freedom, even if it was only a small light in the darkness. Sadly, however, her dreams would end in death. On a humid morning in late June of 2013, the young woman's body was found on the outskirts of Jessup, Georgia, near the old railroad tracks just outside of town. Around 7:30 a.m., a local truck driver named Chuck Fowler was making his usual route when he spotted something strange lying near the ditch. At first, Chuck thought it might be discarded trash, but as he drew closer, he saw it was a person. Shocked, Chuck quickly pulled over, dialed 911, and reported what he'd seen. He later told authorities he felt an overwhelming sadness knowing he'd stumbled onto something tragic. When police arrived, they confirmed that the body was that of Ellie Mae. Ellie had been laid carefully in the ditch, naked, her eyes closed, and her body still. She had no visible signs of clothing, and an old leather belt was found wrapped around her neck, which suggested she'd been strangled. Authorities immediately began to search the area for clues, but they quickly realized there were no personal items, like a purse or phone, near her body. To them, it looked like she'd been killed elsewhere, and then brought to this location. As word spread around town, people were stunned. Many knew Ellie as the quiet young woman who had married Marshall DeWitt, the much older pastor who kept to himself. Friends and acquaintances struggled to understand how Ellie could end up here, especially since she seemed to be so private and seldom left Marshall's side. Police tried to gather statements from locals, but details were scarce. People mentioned seeing Ellie at Bev's liquor store a few days prior, looking tired but friendly. Chuck, the driver who'd found her, would later say he couldn't shake the image of Ellie lying there in silence, her dreams and life cut short. What started as a routine delivery had turned into the discovery of a tragic scene that would haunt the town of Jessup for years to come. When police arrived on the scene near the Jessup railroad tracks, they moved quickly, blocking off the area to keep bystanders back. Leading the investigation was Detective James Coulson, a straightforward officer in his late 40s known for his calm demeanor and thorough approach. Detective Coulson, along with his partner, Detective Amelia Burke, took charge of examining the scene, focusing on any potential evidence around Ellie Mae DeWitt's body. As they assessed the area, one detail stood out: the old worn leather belt still fastened around Ellie's neck. Detective Coulson immediately noted its appearance. It was not a common style and seemed similar to one often worn by Ellie's husband, Marshall DeWitt. This discovery led Coulson to suspect the belt might be significant in identifying her killer. Ellie's body lay undisturbed, indicating she'd likely been killed elsewhere and placed here after death. There was no sign of a struggle in the area, no disturbed ground, and no marks on her hands or feet, suggesting she didn't fight back here. Investigators took note of these factors, speculating that her killer might have been someone she knew and trusted, someone she wouldn't feel the need to fight. The detectives carefully photographed the scene from multiple angles, hoping to capture any overlooked details. Forensics teams arrived soon after, gathering soil samples from around Ellie's body and taking swabs for potential DNA evidence. They'd also dusted the area for fingerprints, hoping something would lead them to a suspect. Given Jessup's small size, it was rare for the local team to handle such a complex case, but they worked closely with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations to run the tests as quickly as possible. The detectives searched for other clues, a purse, a phone, or any piece of Ellie's clothing, but found nothing nearby. It became clear that whoever had brought her here had taken careful measures to leave little behind. The case began to take on a darker tone as Detective Coulson and Detective Burke pieced together these early details. The belt remained their strongest lead, connecting Ellie's death to someone close to her. As word spread, townspeople gathered near the police station, watching with a mix of curiosity and sadness. For Ellie's friends, family, and community, the mystery surrounding her death was unsettling. With a potentially recognizable murder weapon and a public location, the Jessup police were left with a chilling puzzle. As the sun set that day, Detective Coulson promised to bring justice for Ellie Mae DeWitt. The investigation quickly turned to Ellie's husband, 65-year-old Eliezer Marshall DeWitt, a retired pastor and known figure in Jessup. The community had mixed feelings about Marshall. Some respected his decades of preaching, while others were wary of his stern ways and frequent sermons on obedience. He had recently retreated from public life, spending most of his time at home with Ellie, whom he'd purchased from her father for just $5,000 just 2 months earlier. When Detective Coulson and Detective Burke arrived to question him, Marshall was sitting alone on his front porch, his Bible resting on his lap. Marshall had a reputation for being deeply traditional, believing strongly in a man's divine authority over his household. During questioning, he was guarded, maintaining a calm yet evasive demeanor as he spoke about his marriage to Ellie. According to him, their marriage was arranged out of necessity. He needed an sexual outlet and someone to do the chores, and Ellie was in need of strong guidance, as he put it. When asked about the belt found at the scene, Marshall claimed he recently lost one, but he couldn't remember where or when. He shrugged off the question, explaining that belts wear out, and he hadn't given it much thought. Detective Burke pressed further, asking Marshall about Ellie's recent moods and whether she'd been happy in their marriage. Marshall grew visibly annoyed at the line of questioning. He described Ellie as young and full of dreams, but he insisted that her fantasies about singing in Atlanta were dangerous distractions that didn't belong in a Christian household. When detectives asked if he'd ever hurt her, Marshall's face darkened, and he defensively replied that he whipped her whenever she did the chores wrong, but never intended to cause her harm. He added that he used scripture to guide his actions and always acted in Ellie's best interest. As the questioning continued, Marshall became increasingly agitated. He described Ellie's dreams as childish, scoffing at her aspirations of a singing career. He admitted that he had forbidden her from leaving Jessup, fearing the corrupting influence of the outside world. Marshall's control over Ellie's life, as detectives began to see, ran deep, restricting her choices, her friendships, and even her faith. Yet he insisted that Ellie's death had nothing to do with him, portraying himself as a misunderstood protector rather than a suspect. Despite his denials, Marshall's statements raised many questions. His dismissive attitude toward Ellie's dreams, his control over her life, and his loose response about the missing belt all pointed to a man who viewed Ellie not as a partner, but as his possession. Detectives left the duo at home that day with a stronger suspicion that Marshall's beliefs and behavior could have played a role in Ellie's tragic fate. As the investigation progressed, detectives turned their attention to Ellie Mae's father, Marley J. Buell, a former lawyer who had been disbarred after financial troubles and a public scandal. In Jessup, Marley was known for his brash personality, his sharp legal mind, and an unfortunate tendency toward reckless behavior. At 43, he was far from the once promising attorney people remembered. His fall from grace had left him bitter, broke, and spending most nights at Rusty's bar or at the liquor store, where he racked up debt he struggled to pay back. Detective Coulson and Detective Burke found Marley at his small, cluttered home, where he was nursing a drink when they arrived. His body language was defensive, and he greeted them with a half-hearted shrug. When questioned, Marley seemed indifferent, more concerned with his dwindling finances than with his daughter's death. He described Ellie as a stubborn girl, often daydreaming about a life that, in his opinion, was beyond her reach. He admitted he had arranged her marriage to Marshall because he saw no other way to settle a large debt he owed to the local liquor store. Detective Burke questioned him about his last conversation with Ellie, and Marley only shrugged, saying she had become too soft and needed a man to bleep her. His dismissive tone struck a nerve with the detectives, who noted his lack of remorse. Marley didn't attempt to hide the fact that he viewed Ellie as more of an asset than a daughter. "She wasn't gonna make it big," he said, rolling his eyes. "This ain't some American Idol fairy tale." When Detective Coulson pressed him about his financial situation, Marley admitted that the $5,000 he received from Marshall had barely made a dent in his debt. He mentioned that Ellie had tried to talk to him about her unhappiness in the marriage, but he brushed her off, reminding her that her dreams were foolish. When asked if he'd ever considered Ellie's feelings, Marley seemed almost annoyed, muttering that he didn't raise her to be a princess. As detectives continued questioning, Marley grew increasingly irritable. His answers became vague, and he started deflecting, blaming Ellie's youth and wild ideas for her troubles. He scoffed when asked if he thought Ellie's marriage might have led to her death, accusing the detectives of wasting time on him, when, in his words, everyone knew Marshall was the one controlling her. Despite Marley's lack of cooperation, the detectives noted the strained relationship he had with Ellie and his complete disregard for her well-being. To Marley, Ellie's marriage had been a business deal, pure and simple. The financial desperation and his cold treatment of his daughter revealed a man who saw little value in Ellie's dreams or her happiness. Detectives left Marley's home feeling that while he hadn't necessarily murdered Ellie, his decision to sell her may have set her tragic end in motion. On June 24, 2013, Jessup police received a call that changed the course of Ellie Mae's case. That morning was humid, with thick clouds gathering overhead as the call came in from Wayne Memorial Hospital. Ellie's autopsy report had uncovered a surprising twist. She was several weeks pregnant at the time of her death. This detail had gone unnoticed by everyone in her life. For Detectives Coulson and Burke, this information opened up a new set of questions and possible motives. Ellie's pregnancy wasn't just a detail. It could have been a motive for her murder. Immediately, the detectives started reviewing her relationships and anyone she might have been close to in recent months. They knew her marriage to Marshall DeWitt was strained, and Ellie had often expressed her unhappiness. But this new information suggested she had sought comfort elsewhere, likely with someone she trusted. The detectives wondered if she had formed a connection with someone outside her marriage and began searching for leads on who this potential baby daddy might be. Detective Coulson decided to check into Ellie's text messages and social media activity, hoping it would reveal more about her personal life. Ellie had mostly used her old Nokia cell phone for texting and had a modest Facebook profile. Her recent messages didn't reveal much, just some conversations with her friend, Beverly "Bev" Turner, about her dream of moving to Atlanta. However, her phone records showed a pattern of calls to a number from out of town made late at night. This number, it turned out, belonged to a traveling contractor who had recently done work in Jessup. When the detectives tracked down the contractor, they learned he had an illicit one-night stand with Ellie during his time in town. He confirmed they had sex together, sharing their dreams and frustrations. He also admitted he was unaware of her marriage situation and had no idea she might have been pregnant. Although he showed genuine sadness over Ellie's death, detectives still kept him on their radar as they dug deeper. Armed with this new information, Coulson and Burke turned their focus back on their previous suspects, especially Marshall. If Ellie had been pregnant by another man, Marshall's reaction might have turned violent. Police now suspected that discovering Ellie's pregnancy could have triggered his anger, seeing it as an embarrassment to his strict beliefs and public reputation. With this new lead, the investigators were more convinced than ever that the tragedy of Ellie's murder went far deeper than they initially realized. With the investigation leading detectives Coulson and Burke down new paths, their attention turned to another person close to Ellie Mae, her friend, Beverly "Bev" Turner. Bev, 36, was the daughter of the local liquor store owner in Jessup and often worked as a cashier there. Known to some as a dependable employee and a bit of a quiet soul, Bev had built a friendship with Ellie over the past year. She was one of the few people Ellie confided in, often visiting her during Bev's shifts at the store. Detectives began suspecting that Bev may have had deeper feelings for Ellie. Locals had noticed subtle changes in Bev's demeanor whenever Ellie spoke about her dream of leaving Jessup for Atlanta. Bev's reserved personality sometimes masked what appeared to be a possessive side, and she became noticeably tense when Ellie shared her ambitions. Friends had noticed Bev's demeanor shift when Ellie spoke about leaving town or starting a new life. Was Bev simply a concerned friend, or did she feel threatened by the idea of losing Ellie's friendship and potentially more? Detective Burke decided to bring Bev in for questioning. She arrived wearing her usual work uniform, a simple polo shirt with the shop's logo, and seemed uneasy as she sat down across from the detectives. They began the interview by asking Bev about her friendship with Ellie and any knowledge she might have had of Ellie's relationships. Bev spoke calmly, though her hands visibly shook as she answered. When asked directly about Ellie's pregnancy, Bev paused, saying she hadn't known Ellie was expecting. Her surprise seemed genuine, but her hesitation on other questions made the detectives wonder if she was holding back. As the questioning continued, the detectives noticed moments of subtle tension in Bev's responses. When asked if she'd ever seen Ellie with the traveling contractor, Bev replied tersely, her eyes narrowing slightly. She admitted she sometimes felt protective of Ellie and had advised her against getting close to strangers, fearing she'd be taken advantage of. Her responses painted a picture of someone who, despite her mild-mannered exterior, might have harbored intense feelings for her friend. Despite the limited evidence linking her to Ellie's death, the detectives felt there was more to Bev's story. They left the interrogation room unconvinced that Bev had told them everything. In the days following the interview, they kept her on their list of suspects, hoping that further investigation would reveal whether her connection to Ellie was purely friendly or something more. After weeks of investigation, the pieces of Ellie Mae's tragic story fell into place, and detectives Coulson and Burke found the evidence they needed to confirm Marshall DeWitt, Ellie's husband, as her killer. As they reviewed details about Ellie's life and her marriage to Marshall, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of control and manipulation. For Marshall, a retired pastor known for his strict views, Ellie's pregnancy shattered his sense of control. Although the pregnancy wasn't his, Marshall viewed it as a deep betrayal and a personal disgrace. Convinced that Ellie had brought shame to his reputation, his anger grew. Late on June 21, 2013, Marshall confronted Ellie about her pregnancy. He had long felt possessive of her, an attitude evident in how he kept her from pursuing her dreams. The confrontation quickly escalated, and as Ellie tried to defend herself, Marshall's rage overwhelmed him. He reached for his old, worn leather belt, a belt he often wore while preaching. In his eyes, Ellie's actions were not only a personal affront, but also a violation of what he considered moral order. In a dark moment, fueled by anger and a twisted sense of righteousness, he used the belt to strangle Ellie. When it was over, he laid her body near the railroad tracks on the outskirts of Jessup, hoping the discovery would look like a random attack or a tragic accident. Following the discovery of Ellie's body, detectives initially looked at multiple suspects, but soon physical evidence began pointing to Marshall. Lab tests confirmed that the belt used in the murder matched one Marshall had worn in numerous photos at local church events. A closer look at his recent behavior revealed more cracks in his alibi. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguments from their home, and when police conducted a search, they found letters from Ellie, hinting at her wish to leave him. Once detectives had sufficient evidence, they moved forward with Marshall's arrest. On July 15, 2013, they approached Marshall at his home. Wearing his usual somber expression, Marshall seemed unfazed when he opened the door, even as the officers informed him of the charges. The reality of the situation didn't seem to sink in until the handcuffs were clasped around his wrists. His calm demeanor faltered, and for the first time, witnesses noticed a flash of panic in his eyes. The arrest shook him, but not enough to cause remorse. Instead, he mumbled to himself about being betrayed by Ellie. As word of Marshall's arrest spread through Jessup, Ellie's family felt a mixture of relief and anger. They were devastated to learn that someone so close could betray her in such a brutal way, and the community felt a sense of closure, even as they mourned Ellie's life and dreams cut short. Marshall DeWitt's trial began in March 2015, and the town of Jessup was captivated by the tragic story that now unfolded in court. On one side was prosecutor Wendy Gates, 42, a sharp-minded attorney known for her commitment to justice in Wayne County. Gates presented the evidence methodically, pointing to the control Marshall held over Ellie Mae from their marriage to her final days. Gates argued that Ellie's pregnancy and Marshall's inability to control it led him to murder her in cold blood. Marshall's defense attorney, Clyde Stanton, 55, took a controversial approach. Known for his experience with complex cases, Stanton brought a biblical defense to the courtroom, citing Marshall's deep-rooted religious beliefs. Stanton argued that Marshall had acted out of a distorted sense of righteousness, claiming he'd been driven to discipline Ellie for what he saw as a grave sin. This biblical angle painted Marshall as a man whose actions, while wrong, were motivated by his faith. Stanton worked to persuade the jury that Marshall's actions, though brutal, were not driven by malice but by a misguided belief that he was preserving moral order. The defense stunned many, including Ellie's grieving family, but ultimately had an impact on the jury. The argument seemed to evoke some sympathy, or at least understanding of Marshall's misguided mindset. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a controversial verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Rather than a life sentence, Marshall received a 20-year prison term with the possibility of parole after 15 years, a decision that shocked many in the courtroom. Marshall showed little emotion when the verdict was read. As he stood to hear his sentence, a hint of satisfaction appeared on his face, suggesting he believed his argument had been justified. For him, the verdict affirmed his view of himself as a wronged man rather than a cold-blooded killer. For the family, justice felt incomplete. They had hoped for a stronger sentence that reflected the brutality of Marshall's actions. Friends and neighbors of Ellie also voiced their frustration, feeling that the sentence allowed Marshall too much leniency. As Marshall was led away, Ellie's loved ones were left with the painful knowledge that her dreams in life had been worth only a fraction of the justice they'd sought. After the trial in March 2015, the lives of those involved changed forever. Marshall DeWitt was sent to the Georgia State Prison in Wrightsville, where he began serving his 20-year sentence. In prison, Marshall remained isolated, spending most of his time reading the Bible, his only source of comfort. He often spoke about how he believed he was misunderstood, still clinging to his view of righteousness. While some inmates respected his past as a pastor, others saw him as a coward for taking the life of a young woman. News of his conviction spread through the prison system, leading to an uneasy reputation among fellow inmates. Marshall often received letters from people who shared his beliefs, which made him feel like he still had supporters outside the prison walls. Meanwhile, Marley J. Buell, Ellie's father, faced his own demons. After his daughter's murder, he fell into a deeper spiral of addiction, frequently seen at local bars in Jessup. His gambling debts grew, leading to more problems with the law. In late 2015, Marley was arrested for DUI and sentenced to community service. The public backlash was intense, as many felt he had sold his daughter for money and now couldn't even care for her memory. With each passing month, his reputation in Jessup dwindled, and he struggled to find work due to his criminal record and bad reputation. Beverly "Bev" Turner, Ellie's friend, took the murder hard. While she was never considered a suspect, the news of Ellie's death left her heartbroken. Bev worked as a cashier at the local liquor store and often found herself haunted by memories of their conversations. She felt a deep sense of loss and regret for not being able to protect her friend from Marshall's control. In the years following Ellie's murder, Bev became an advocate for domestic abuse awareness in Jessup. She started a small support group for women experiencing similar situations, determined to honor Ellie's memory. Bev's efforts earned her some recognition in the community. and she became known for her passion for helping others escape abusive relationships. Though their paths were different, the lives of Marshall, Marley, and Bev remained intertwined with the tragic memory of Ellie Mae, forever changing the fabric of their small town.